Hey, how you doing? It is Friday, the 20th of November, 2020. I'm sure there's some symmetry in that phrase. And this is episode, I think, 21 of the NOTCAST, where I largely replace my social life in lockdown by talking to an inanimate object which doesn't respond to me. It's a tough crowd. I have no idea if the jokes are working, but I'm giving it a shot and seeing how it goes. So today I am going to be talking about a band that maybe some of you have heard of and some of you haven't. I'm going to give you a quick kind of overview. They've released 165 albums, and they've had 23 members, and they've had probably more record labels than they've had members. It's a German band that formed in 1969 called Tangerine Dream. Now, I'm well aware that some of you think, Mark, can't you talk about bands that aren't like dead? And yeah, I can, but I don't want to talk about all of the things straight up front. You know, I want to think. I'm a kind of obsessive dude. When I think about something, I tend to think about it a lot, and then I tend to leave it for a period of time, and I come back to it later on. Normally, a few years later on, I listen to it again. And normally, I'm the kind of guy that if I listen to an album, I go, that's not very good. I'll put it away. I'll come back to it a few years later and go, is it still not very good? Now, the answer to that normally is yes, it's still abjectly terrible, which can be proven by science and graphs. And there'll be a couple of those during the course of this series, because it's not going to be one episode that's done in 40 minutes. When you've got 163 albums, if I give each album 15 seconds, I'm probably still going to run out of time by the time I get to the end of the 40-minute or so, which I have. I think what I'm going to do and start off with is really to talk about just how daunting their discography is. Since they started in 1969, they're still bafflingly still going now, which I think is 51 years later, even though none of the original members remain, and the only member that had stayed in the band all the way through died 5 years ago, nearly 6 years ago now. What I'm going to do is instead just kind of talk through, give you an overview of them and where to start. So, without you wanting to think, I'm going to spend 40 minutes having a guy talk at me about a band I'm not really interested in, I'm going to do two things. Firstly, where to start. Secondly, why you should be interested in them. Firstly, where to start. 2012 and 2011, the band released two box sets, which were effectively card sleeve, cheapo reproductions of the original vinyl albums, which covered the classic years that the band had from 1973 to 1983. I think they're both about £10-15 now. Buy those. Don't bother with anything else. Just buy those if you're tempted. It'll be about 30 quid. You'll get an instant record collection and you'll get all their good shit in one place. There's a couple of other albums that are really, really good, which sit outside of that, but generally, go there. All right, because that's all the classic tracks. It's the best lineups of the band. It's the period where they were most sonically interesting and engaging, and where they'd got the hang of writing the best material. And the band changed and evolved over time as the lineups changed and evolved. And some of the lineups were really no good, very bad indeed, and some of them were absolutely fantastic. But I'd like to point out, even though I have probably more Tangerine Dream albums than anybody else in the nearest 100 miles, I still have less than a third of their releases. I have 56 of their albums on CD and various other formats, and that's probably less than, I think there's maybe like 4 people who've got more than 56 Tangerine Dream albums in the whole of the UK. Poor bastards. That means they've listened to the covers album. And by the way, if you don't know where to start, there are 3 albums you shouldn't listen to start with. One is called Cyclone, one is called Tiger, and the other one, which came out in 2010, is called Undercover. They are all abjectly terrible, and I will give them a thorough kicking behind the back of the bike sheds to prove that. So, starting off with the band, I think I'm going to talk through really and give you a kind of like an overview of this box set, which is called In Search of Hades, which was released last year. And And I'm back in the room. Sorry, I had to press pause there. Normally, the thing that I like to do is to just talk in one go and almost like just splurge all the information out in one great big vomit. Kind of like, you know, when you sit an exam and you feel like, yes, I'm going to remember everything. And then it all just goes out in one go, and then it stops. Now, I haven't sat an exam since I was in my 20s. So I'll be really blunt about it. I hate sitting exams, and I wanted to get a professional qualification. So I sat my last exam, I think on my 29th birthday, and what I wanted to do was to never sit another exam again after that. So between about the age of about 15 and 30, I sat about 50, 60 exams. Now I never have to do it, which is, oh, that's so good, because I hate them. I think exams are a poor reflection of how people understand and comprehend knowledge. Not that you care, because this is about where do I start with Tangerine Dream. And as I said earlier, buy the cheapo box sets that came out in 2011 or thereabouts, which had all the albums in card sleeves. They are considerably cheaper than these, slightly less comprehensive, but considerably cheaper. And I'm the kind of guy who's a sucker for a box set, and I suspect you probably already worked that out on the grounds that I have a museum of modern music behind me here. But what I will say is, when I was younger, in the days before the internet was a big deal, the idea of having access to all the music that had ever been recorded was fantastic. You know, I really wanted to be able to listen to anything at any time, and unless you physically had a copy of the album, you couldn't. So there are, you know, records and recordings and performances that were talked about in hushed tones. So, like, you know, you really, really need to hear Kraftwerk in Ottawa in 1975. Now, thanks to the glory of Google and YouTube, hello, I can get that and be listening to it within about 30 seconds. Whereas before, I'd have to find, well, who's got a copy of Kraftwerk in Ottawa? More correctly, have they got it on tape, and can I get it? And then I'd have to write to them, and they might send me a tape in the post, and it might take weeks. And that's even if you found the right dude, let alone anything else. And by the way, it's almost always dudes that we used to do tape trading by post. No idea why. You know, guys, we're just made a certain way, aren't we, to be interested in certain things and to have obsessions. Which is, by the way, the name of a great Suede song. So, Tangerine Dream, In Search of Hades, was released in April 2019. And I'm kind of going to do a bit of an unboxing and kind of a bit of a tour as well as I talk through them. What I haven't told you is why you should be interested in this band. So, I will. I mean, to me, they were a band that ceased to have any relevancy in about 1992. But the period between 1973 and 1992, they released an awful lot of material. They averaged about 3 or 4 albums a year, and almost all of it was at least listenable. Some of it absolute garbage. Most of it was at least interesting. And the thing which I find was most interesting about them was twofold. I mean, firstly, they sounded like they'd come from the future because they were using an awful lot of technology, cutting edge, rare, expensive, unique synthesizers, sequencers, racks of kit. It looked like something out of Star Trek when they played live. There were so many little beeping lights and buttons and weird things that made noises and went ping and all that kind of stuff. That's one thing. So the music doesn't sound like it belongs to any particular generation or decade. As time progressed, the band became more used to using mass-produced equipment, which the barriers to entry were much lower. It became much cheaper to use that equipment. Everybody sounded like them, and you know, they weren't pushing and bending the boundaries of technology so much. I think the other thing about them, which is really, really interesting to me, is that although I haven't mentioned it yet, I have a deep and abiding love that will never, ever, I mean, hardcore will never die, but you will. I have a deep love for post-rock. Now, it's a weird genre, and I don't quite know how to describe it, apart from that it doesn't have conventional verses or choruses. And to me, Tangerine Dream are very much like an electronic version of a post-rock band before post-rock even really existed. Is that they were interested in exploring textures and sounds and ideas. There was a lot of repetition. There was a lot of minimalism in the work. You could listen to a song, and to call it a song would be to grossly overstate its construction. It was almost as if every song that or every track that they released was almost somewhat improvised. And the band went through and explored variations upon sound. So a lot of it is repetitive, especially those little sequences. They never get bored making the same noises, but they were kind of moving through and rotating through the ideas that there were around that. So it was almost like watching time-lapse photography of plants. Is that there's variation, but it moves slowly, and over time the song changes completely, which is why they became very, very good at writing side-long tracks, which move through a number of different pieces. To me, there's a huge influence of Pink Floyd in Tangerine Dream. And they do mention some bands in the sleeve to an album called Turn of the Tides, which perhaps if you listen to the albums that they're making, you wouldn't hear any of those bands in there. But we're talking bands like Smashing Pumpkins, Pop Will Eat Itself. I think Meat Beat Manifesto, I think, are mentioned in there. Sisters of Mercy, and you go, I can't hear any of that in them, but it's in there somewhere. And that's where it starts. So really, the first Tangerine Dream album I have is this, which is a double pack of Alpha Centauri and Atem, which was released, I think, in 1976 on Virgin to capitalise on their commercial success. These two albums were from a period where the recordings were mostly beatless, no drums, no rhythms, largely just synthesizers, sequences, sounds, flutes and things like that. It was all improvised and basically mostly crap. If you wanted to listen to it, go ahead. I wouldn't recommend you listen to it, but if you want to listen to it, it feels exactly like what it is, which is it's music for sitting around and getting stoned to. And that's the type of record that your dad's mates would have had in the 70s before you realise that your dad's mates were wankers. Sorry, my dad's mates, but I'm just using it as a general statement here around that. And, they must have clearly just sat around smoking a heck of a lot of drugs in the 70s in bedrooms before suddenly they had to grow moustaches and drive Ford Capris and have slacks and all that type of stuff, and moan about the unfairness of final salary pension plans. Obviously, the 70s was a terrible decade that style forgot, but that's not why we're here. Where the Tangerine Dream story really starts, I think, for a lot of people, is this album, which is, I think, Phaedra, which was released, I think, in 1973 or 1974. So the band was signed to Virgin Records. Now, Virgin Records were on the back of Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, and so therefore the band Virgin Records were probably casting around looking for acts that kind of sounded like Tubular Bells and Mike Oldfield and synthesizers and stuff, and weren't Kraftwerk, so that they could kind of tap into that market. So this is the first big album that they had. Now, at this point, the band were doing things like getting into the charts and being on television, and you could buy the albums in Woolworths, probably for what was the gross sum of £1.75 or something. Which is still more than I paid for this vinyl copy. And that is the first release that the band had on Virgin Records, which is where this box set, In Search of Hades, kicks off, which suits me fine. Now, before I get into the box set, I will also mention that the band released a series of CD mastered versions of their albums in their 1995, which was called I think it was the definitive editions of the albums. These are not the definitive editions of the albums, and we will find out why as I bitchly descend further into the box set. So, In Search of Hades. Now, this has 18 discs on it, 16 CDs, 2 Blu-rays. Was available on a certain well-known internet retailer for about £50, and I looked at it and thought, do you know what, I really, really want that, especially for £50. So we're going to go through the contents that we've got there on here. First thing we've got is a book. As far as I can tell, this is a very different book to the book which was written by the band Soul, constituent member Edgar Froese, which kind of adds context, photographs, terrible haircuts, picture of handbills, posters, all that type of stuff as it went through it. So for £57, if you want 18 discs of Tangerine Dream, that's great. If you want, the standard core albums, go for something else. So this is I think CDs 9 to 18. This is CDs 1 to 8, and I think the cat's just walked into the room. That was why I had to break my conversation earlier. So what's on here is 8 discs to start off with. So starting up here and reproducing the original label stickers that the vinyl discs had, we've got Phaedra, and we've also got a bonus set of stereo remixes that are on there. So Stephen Wilson, who apparently is a big deal in prog rock circles, I don't know, had access to the tapes, and he remixed them in 2018 with the benefits of hindsight, technology and marketing ploys to see whether he could perhaps help the band sell some more copies. They also, while they were going through that, also went back to the original source tapes and found 2 extra discs here, about 100 minutes or so of similarly improvised material during the same session. So Phaedra was largely improvised. It doesn't have rhythms, drums or anything like that on it. It's again, music to get stoned to, but I've never been stoned, so I don't know about that. But I'm interested in some of the later material which the band get into. And the 2 extra CDs have a number of unreleased songs on with such inspiring titles as Flute Organ Piece, Outtake Version 2A and Organ Piece. They're pretty good, but they're about as inspired as the titles go, so you don't necessarily need to hear them, and besides they're all for free on Spotify. There's also discs 4 and 5 is a previously unreleased recording of the band live at the Victoria Palace Theatre, which I think is in London, on the 16th of June 1974, when I was 11 months old. At that point, the band's live shows were very different from the records, and I'm going to kind of explain why in a minute when we get to some of the other live albums themselves. CD 6, which I think is here, is a previously unreleased album. So Tangerine Dream are very good at recording albums and not releasing them. And I think they've released about 8 or 9 albums decades after they were recorded during the course of their career, because they were working so bloody fast. And if you're doing 3 albums a year, it's a big deal. Just do a 4th. Doesn't have to be good. Just has to be stuck out later on a box set. So this soundtrack, Oedipus Tyrannus, is pretty good, but not amazing. I can see why it didn't come out. It was more of the same. It probably would have hurt the band's commercial potential at the time. And it's the soundtrack to, I think, a play that was, I think, put on in Chichester in the UK. So the band recorded a soundtrack for it that was then played back whilst the play was taking place on stage. There have been bootleg versions of that soundtrack, but they've been very incomplete, and most people thought that these tapes were lost. Now, CDs 7 and 8 are live at the Rainbow, with these ones here, which was on the 26th of October 1974, when I was a grand old 1 year and 3 months old. And again, largely improvised, mostly unreleased material as you kind of go through it. So that has 8 discs there, which really only covers one studio album, which is Phaedra, with 2 discs of unreleased outtakes, a completely unreleased album, and 2 live shows. The next part of it, the 18 discs on here, not so weighty in terms of unreleased material, but still pretty interesting. So we've got the album Rubycon, which was released here. You have definitely seen that image somewhere, which again was released as a definitive edition in 1995 on CD. Also released Stoner's favourite double gatefold album, music to get smashed to, or mashed to, depending on your point of view. It's okay, but it's certainly not the best stuff that they've ever done. It's a couple of albums later before I think the band really hit their stride. So we've got CD9 on there, is Rubycon. It also features an alternate mix of the Rubycon Part 1 title track, again remixed by Stephen Wilson. I can barely tell the difference. It's probably interesting to the train spotters. It's not essential, unless you're the type of person that wants to own absolutely everything ever by any band that's ever existed. I would say wait until this comes a little bit cheaper. Right, CDs 10 and 11, here and here, live at the Royal Albert Hall in 1975 on the 2nd of April. I'm sure somebody wonderful was born on the 2nd of April 1975, but I can't think of anyone at the moment. Really, really sorry. I'll probably Google them later and find out that I don't know. James or I don't know, someone famous was born on that day, and I have no idea. Sorry, Winona Ryder. Although obviously Keanu Reeves is about 4,000 years old and never ages, so it can't be him, can it? Because he's a time traveller. So we have 10 and 11 live at the Royal Albert Hall. And I think at this point I'm going to talk about the band's live performances. A lot of the live performances were largely improvised. The band were taking the equipment out, and there was no guarantee that any of the equipment would work on any given day. If it did work, it might not be in tune. And so the band had a very kind of flexible approach to playing live. They're basically like an electronic jam band, on the grounds that you couldn't actually go and play the studio material because the equipment was so unreliable and so erratic. I mean, it's the same approach that a lot of acts at the same time took. Kraftwerk's 70s live recordings sound nothing like the albums at all, although they follow the same broad structure of the songs. Again, beginnings, endings, improvisations, all completely new and unusual. So, Tangerine Dream, live at the Albert Hall, a third unreleased concert there. Seems baffling to me they ever played the Royal Albert Hall, to be honest, but so be it. I was, not even 2 at that point, so it doesn't have to be baffling to me. I just have to remember that I was somewhere unable to talk, about 110 miles north at the time. CD12 is the album Ricochet. Now, Ricochet is ostensibly a live album, although, as we will see, Tangerine Dream live albums are very rarely live. Now, I've mentioned that before, that the band did electronic jams when they were playing live, and they were largely doing freeform, mostly improvised sets that were based around some start and end points, thanks to the availability of the technology and the sequences, and then the songs would grow or evolve or shrink, or depending upon the equipment, crash, overheat, fall out of tune, whatever. As it went along, and thanks to the limitations of technology, that still affected a lot of bands that worked in very similar genres right up until about 1999, 2000. Underworld, who I absolutely love, Orbital, hello, who I love as well, had a very similar approach with technology, as that they did their best to replicate the records, but the technology wasn't reliable and sometimes things went wrong. Or in the case of Tangerine Dream, you just make it up as you go along and hope to God you didn't screw up, which generally worked. So the Ricochet album is, I think, recorded live, although I can't remember where it was recorded live. Officially, I think it's recorded live in Coventry, but it isn't. It's probably recorded live in the studio. It also has some new stereo remixes by Stephen Wilson on. Chap's clearly popular. CD 13, moving over onto here, is Stratosfear, which I think is where the band really started to step into their style. Now, at this point, the band had settled into a lineup which had Edgar Froese, Christoph Frank, who was again with the band for about until 1988, and then Peter Baumann, who was in and out of the band right up until 1977. And I think there was another couple of members that played live and maybe recorded an album or two as Peter Baumann drifted in and out of the group. At this point, the band was starting to invest a bit of money in technology. They were able to get sequencers, drum machines, rhythms, and they were able to rack up and run sequencers and bass parts that were then fed through echoes and repeats and loops. And they became far more dynamic and far more interesting to listen to. Up to the point of Stratosphere, they were largely without rhythms, without drums, without bass, without anything like that. Whereas after from Stratosphere and beyond, the band were able to actually really fill in the sonic textures. Oh God! See, remember I told you the other time that I was trying to give up caffeine. Well, clearly it's working, but also I've not actually spoken this long for a very long time at any one person about anything. And although I'm pretending you're a person, you're not. You're actually a mobile phone on a shelf next to a post-it note. Now that makes you feel a bit weird, doesn't it? So. CD 13 Stratosphere. Now, Stratosphere does have a substantial amount of bonus tracks on it, which takes the CD itself up to about 80 minutes. So, on some CD players and some CD drives that you rip and turn them into MP3s, this disc doesn't fully play. It didn't on mine, so I ripped some of the tracks towards the end off YouTube because I'm very, very naughty. But before the pirate police get upset, I bought the fucking thing. It's not my fault it doesn't work in the CD drive. You've put too much information on it. You should have stopped being so cheap and stuck an extra disc of unusual and rare tracks. And there are a lot of unusual and rare tracks which should be on the box set, by the way, cheapskates. Cough up. If you're going to charge big money, put big content in it. Also, by the way, YouTube, this is how you do a box set, okay? 18 discs for about £100, not 5 discs for about £100. And not just 18 discs of just the albums. Some of these are absolutely crammed to the gills with extra stuff. So Stratosphere, for example, has the original film soundtrack recorded at the Coventry Cathedral in, I think, 1975. Now, on one of these discs here, Ricochet, which contains Tangerine Dream live at Coventry Cathedral. The visuals are live at Coventry Cathedral, which is the audio that's on here, but the audio for live at Coventry Cathedral is the Ricochet album, which is clearly well-rehearsed stadium show. This one here, guys. So, in order to really fully get the experience of watching the authentic live at Coventry Cathedral set, put the Blu-ray disc on, then press play on the CD, because the audio doesn't matter. What? That's madness. Just put an extra... Anyway, doesn't matter. So Stratosphere also has single edits of the Stratosphere title track and the Big Sleep in Search of Hades. There are some really great tracks on this. Some brilliant songs, and as we get further into the disc, I will be effusive in my praise of some of the contents. We also have, following on from that, is Encore. Now Encore, hang on a moment, until this is where I've clearly got a very slick production. This is Ricochet, by the way, and this is Stratosphere. That's Stratosphere. I just showed you the back of Stratosphere. That you can pull together there. So let's put those two in there. Again, these were released as definitive editions on CD, and they've got the details on there. These they're pretty good. They're not amazing. If you buy them cheap. Don't pay big money for them, or buy the box set as I previously mentioned. By the way, we are only at this point, I think, 8 albums into the band's 163 album discography, and we're 28 minutes in, which is pretty surprising. Now, the first major omission in the In Search of Hades box set is the studio album that they recorded in 1977, which is Sorcerer, which is the soundtrack to the William Friedkin film, which is a remake of another film called Wages of Fear. This was released on MCA Records, not Virgin, so it was outside of their Virgin contract, and it's not on the Virgin box set. So it's very clear and specific that it is the Virgin years and not the band's entire body of work. Sorcerer is a great album of theirs. It's a brilliant entry point if you want to know what late 70s Tangerine Dream sounded like. It takes the approach that the band have had with some of the previous albums and smashes it into pieces. So previously, the band were very keen on doing side-long 20-minute epics, clearly very influenced by Pink Floyd tracks like Atom Heart Mother and Echoes, and the sequence that you've got on Dark Side of the Moon, where each of the songs is made up of multiple pieces and they transition and grow, evolve in a way that feels organic and real. So you've got a multi-layered, relatively dense, fairly interesting change of sonic textures, styles and songs throughout the course of it. Sorcerer, all due respect, sod that, we're making the soundtrack to a movie. The songs are going to be, in some cases, less than 2 minutes long. And that's what you're going to have to live with, guys. Also, when the band took the approach of writing for films and film soundtracks, not only had they not seen the film, sometimes they hadn't seen any stills from the film. Sometimes they recorded the soundtrack before the film was made, which is pretty crazy. So, for example, with Sorcerer, as I understand it, and some of the other films that they made as well, is that they had photographs of the people that were going to be in the movie, they had a script of the movie, and then they sat down and went, right, so this scene here, which takes 3 pages, is going to be, I don't know, let's say it's a truck full of explosives on a wonky bridge in the middle of a monsoon somewhere in Argentina. I go, right, so we think that'll take about 5 minutes, so we're going to write a piece of music that we think will work as a mood piece that'll last about 5 minutes. They weren't scoring to the video. They weren't going, so the Darth Vader walks in here and then he goes, then let's play the Imperial March. There was none of that was going on. It was about building and setting a theme and a feeling and an atmosphere that sat alongside with the video and sat alongside with the visuals, which makes for a completely new and unusual approach to making, firstly, film soundtracks, because they're recording a film soundtrack to a film that they haven't seen and in some cases hasn't yet been made. And then secondly, the band were taking the approach of trying to not write side-long epics, but actually just write small pieces that were 5 minutes or 2 minutes long. That was going to come and bite them on the arse later on in their career. But we'll leave all the juicy bits until then. So Source was not on the box set, which is a bit of an open goal missed there, guys. I don't know really what you were playing at, but that was the first movie soundtrack that the band released. And I think they made movie soundtracks outside of their record label commitments so that they could get a quick infusion of easy cash. Now, when it came to recording the albums, all of the albums, and this becomes really, really apparent as you get into the early 90s, is the albums were not grand artistic statements. The albums were results of maybe 4 weeks at work, and sometimes the band would write a song, and that whole song would be 3 or 4 minutes long, and that would just be Thursday in Hansa Studios in Berlin. That's what you did on Thursday, is you wrote a song called, I don't know, Pilots of the Purple Twilight. And that was Thursday at work. So certainly Tangerine Dream were never going to get to the point of artistic procrastination like Axl Rose or Kate Bush. Bash it out. Does it sound any good? Yeah, it's all right. It's fine. The problem is when you listen to these songs 40 years later, some of them do sound like it was a wet Thursday at Hansa Studios, as opposed to an actual finished, complete, full song. And the band also worked in a very fragmented fashion, and they would continue to work in a fragmented fashion for long periods of time. So they had home studios where they would write their versions of the songs, and they'd bring those versions of the songs in, and one of them would play, and then the rest of the members of the band would build up a texture and a sound around it, and that would be the song. And by the end of the day, 5 o'clock, cup of tea, go to the bar next door, eat some food. Nice bar, by the way, next to Hansa. And that was it. That was your day's work done. And when I went to Hansa Studios, I had a really, really strange feeling, because we went to the restaurant next door. Now, at the restaurant next door to Hansa, lots and lots of people have eaten, drunk, and laughed. So David Bowie had food there, Iggy Pop had food there, REM, U2, Tangerine Dream, pretty much any band. I think probably Depeche Mode as well. So when I walked down the stairs to the toilet, and I thought, Jesus, David Bowie's probably sat on this toilet. Iggy Pop's probably washed his hands in that sink. It's a pretty weird way of looking at it. But at the end of the day, it's just a restaurant which had famous people for customers. It ain't no big deal, really, is it? but it's just a day at work. And some of these albums that the band released, especially as we get further into their discography, really do feel like just a day at work. So following on from Stratosfear came their next album, which was a double live set, ostensibly recorded in America on the North American tour. It's called Encore. This is a double vinyl version of it. Paid £3 for it from a record shop that's got some very, very, very sticky stickers on. I haven't been able to take the sticker off. I'd like to point out, by the way, to Music and Goods Exchange, MVE, in Notting Hill and Soho and Greenwich, get less sticky stickers, because I pay less for your stuff because the stickers are a pain in the ass to get off. Don't do it, guys. Have sticky stickers that aren't made out of nuclear fusion glue that will take the end of, when the world comes to an end, there's going to be three things that are going to be survive. It's going to be Keith Richards, cockroaches, and these fucking stickers. Nothing else will survive the apocalypse. And anyway, Tangerine Dream released Encore. Moving quick detour back to the main subject. So Encore was recorded in the North American tour, March and April 1977. Now, as I've mentioned before, the band took an improvisatory approach to playing live on the grounds that they couldn't actually rely on the technology to replicate the songs that they'd written and recorded in the studio. So they then took the approach of going, right, we better go and write some new material with the equipment. So they would often, you'd go and see them and they'd play nothing that you knew. No material that you'd heard before. It just sounded like the old stuff. So Encore is a great double album. I love this album because it's 4 20-minute pieces. Cherokee Lane, Monolite, Cold Water Canyon, and Desert Dream. Now, I'm told they're recorded live. I don't think they are recorded live, if I'm honest. The band went into the studio, and they often then took the equipment and the material that they'd worked up while they were on stage over the course of a tour, and they used playing it live and playing the songs 20 or 30 times on various stages, and they used that as the basis for their next album. Pink Floyd also used to road test their new material. Kraftwerk used to do it in the 70s. Lots of bands used to play new material live in the 70s to iron out the kinks in front of a paying audience. And when Tangerine Dream said that an album was live, you can bet your bottom dollar that in some cases it definitely isn't. And in fact, there's a pretty controversial couple of live albums later on around that. So after Encore, great record, by the way, love it. It's ideal for spreadsheet work, by the way. If you want to listen to music and you don't want to think about lyrics or anything, you just want to get lost. And sometimes you might think, well, actually, some of these songs, they sound like they were made by machines for machines. It's almost as if someone said to a spreadsheet, your job is to write a song, and they gave, they fed a Kraftwerk song into AI, and then it came out with a Tangerine Dream song. It's that type of thing. But Encore is a really good album. I love it. It's very, very good. And it released a single as well, which had 2 songs, Encore and Hobo March. Now, Encore and Hobo March are remixes of album tracks off Encore. Now, how you can remix live material to turn it into a hit single makes me kind of think that maybe they recorded it in the studio some other time and just pretended that it was live. I don't particularly care because it's all good stuff. But that's the point. Now, CD 15, the next album the band released, is Cyclone. Okay, I can't muck about with that. This is fucking shit. Don't buy it. It is awful. It is the worst Tangerine Dream album I have heard. And the reason it's the worst Tangerine Dream album I've heard is because Peter Baumann had left the band and he'd been replaced by Steve Joliffe and I think Klaus Kruger. Now, Klaus Kruger played drums. He did a great job. Steve Joliffe had been in the very early lineup of the band in 1969. And Steve Joliffe could sing and play flute. And to say sing would be very, very generous. The lyrics are hot garbage. They're awful. They're almost like a phonetic AI impersonation of English. There are 2 songs on the album. Side 1 is awful. It's the worst thing the band ever released. So there's the song Bent Cold Sidewalk and Rising Runner Missed by Endless Sender. Now, the words are terrible. Like I walk to the trees know the answer. I go into the city, I can't hear the trees, I can't hear the answer. No, it's awful. In fact, even the official lyrics, which have been updated on one of the websites, has some of those lyrics in brackets. It just says nonsense shouting. because that's how bad the lyrics are. And the vocalist isn't that good either. He sounds like he would be backing vocalist in the Scorpions as opposed to being the lead vocalist. I am a better singer than him, and I would never sing on stage again, although I did about 20 years ago. It's awful. And when he's not singing, he's playing the flute. You half expect Ron Burgundy to come up and shout "AQUALUNG" during the middle of one of the songs. It's garbage, and the only way that I can listen to Cyclone is by a version I've made where I've actually edited out all the vocals on the album. It takes about 6 minutes out of the album, but it adds about 90% of listenability to it, and it's just awful album. Don't buy it, please. But if you buy the box set, you've got it anyway. Listen to track 3, side 2, which is called Madrigal Meridian. Strange name, but on the other hand, again, sidelong, classic, instrumental, wibbly wobbly stuff all over the place. Bonus tracks on this are Haunted Heights and Barrel Blue, which were from a compilation album that had only been on vinyl before called 7080. And the next album, Force Majeure, also has Chimes and Chains, which is again from the vinyl only 7080 box set. The last album on this box set is called Force Majeure. It's brilliant. It's fan-bloody-tastic. It's got 3 songs on it, 2 of them Stone Dead classics. One's Force Majeure, which is a side-long instrumental track. It's like Pink Floyd's Echoes played by stone Germans with synthesizers, and that's pretty damn high in terms of my praise. And the other track is called Through Metamorphic Rocks, and you will have heard Through Metamorphic Rocks. It's been on dozens of movie soundtracks. It's in the soundtrack to an album called Thief. It's great. Force Majeure is an absolute stone dead Tangerine Dream classic. And if you want to listen to stuff that sounds like post-rock but isn't, made by stone Germans in the 70s, Tangerine Dream are the band for you. But not, obviously, Cyclone, because Cyclone is dog shit. So, we're nearly coming to the end of the review of the box set. There are 2 more discs to touch upon here. There's Blu-ray discs which have got 5/1 mixes by Stephen Wilson of Phaedra and Oedipus Tyrannus, and then on disc 18 you've got a 5/1 mix of Ricochet, and you've got 2 television documentaries. You've got Tangerine Dream at Coventry Cathedral, although the audio for Coventry Cathedral isn't Coventry Cathedral. And then you've got another documentary from 1976 on German television that is hopefully subtitled and also calls Richard Branson a very different name. It might even be something as stupid as calling him Robert Dick, I'm not sure. Anyway, lots of beards, lots of moustaches in a built-up area. And there you go. So that's the kind of the overview, review, unboxing, blah-de-blah-de-blah of Tangerine Dreams in Search of Hades box set. It is, if you like Tangerine Dream and you've got money, keep an eye on it and buy it when it comes on cheap on Amazon. And if you haven't got money and you're tempted, or more correctly, if you don't want to have a massive bloody box set that takes up so much space on your shelf, go for the multi-album Virgin Years box sets that are probably around £10-15 on Amazon, which are much more affordable and also take up far less shelf space. Now that brings us to the end of In Search of Hades. It brings us to the end of the first period of the band's Virgin contract. It also is a nice place for me to stop because I'm starting to get a sore throat because I've spoken non-stop for about 45 minutes. What I will do is I'll stop here. I will upload this to the internet. I'll go and have a cuppa. I'll probably catch up with you tomorrow to talk about the next box set, which was released far more recently, Pilots of Purple Twilight. And I'll give you a tour through, this box set, the band's discography, and some of the other material that the band released around that as well. So in short, In Search of Hades is expensive, it's extravagant, it's really good. If you're a Tangerine Dream completist, buy it. There's fantastic stuff on there. There's 3 unreleased concerts, there's an unreleased album, and there's 5/1 mixes of 3 albums, new mixes of the albums. There's tons of stuff. Apart from the fact that it doesn't have Sorcerer in it, it couldn't be better in covering the band's first period of peak years, which runs 1973 to 1979. But if you don't know who they are, and you go, why the hell are you talking about this band, Mark? Check them out on Spotify. And if you like them, great. And if you don't, that's great too. There's gazillions of other bands in the world, and they're all bloody brilliant. Apart from Yeah. Actually, I'm not going to be bitchy and mention bands I don't like. I'm trying to be a bit an oasis of positivity in a maelstrom of fucktitude, which is the modern world. So I will see you again soon, and I'm going to go off and have a cuppa. Have a lovely rest of the day wherever you are and whatever you're doing. See you later. Bye.